on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here for our weekly course breakdown. This time it's US Open week, which means I'm going to be one happy character. It's my favorite tournament of the year, the hardest conditions that these players are going to see, and if you've been following the channel for quite some time, you know I like myself some carnage, so really excited for this major championship. And in this video specifically, going to be covering everything you need to know about the country club at Brookline and what to expect from playing conditions, and of course, what you want to target from a player perspective in terms of skill set, in terms of recent form, whatever the case may be. We're going to be talking about all the betting and DFS analysis you need to know about the country club and the types of players that I expect to succeed. So whether you're new to DFS, you're a brand new bettor, or just watching the event and wanting to know who to expect to play well, this video is going to be exactly what you're looking for. So with a lot to talk about, a lot to break down about this classical golf course, let's get right on into it. We've got ourselves the country club this week in Brookline, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. This is in close proximity to Fenway Park, so perhaps you've been in the area before, but either way, this is a true American classic, one of the founding members of the USGA back in 1880, and a golf course that has been changed dozens of times over the years. It's had numerous designers with his hands on it, most notably Gil Hanse, who's been there since 2007, who's been getting this place ready for championship play for over 10 years at this point. I mean, it's really been getting this place in pristine condition. So even though this is a golf course that's been around for God knows how long at this point, it's going to be a brand new quote-unquote course because this is a brand new setup this year. There's holes from adjacent courses that are going to be in the routing this time around. So even though we've been at Brookline before, this is going to be a special occasion, including holes number 11 where you have a par 3. It's only 134 yards. It's going to be the first time they're using that hole in, I believe, like almost 50, 60 years, something like that. So even though this is a historical course, it's going to have a new feel this time around. It was designed by William Campbell, but also by the members back in the early 1880s. The first 3 holes, in fact, were built before William Campbell was brought in. The members just brought it on themselves to go out there, create a few golf holes, and over time, after bringing in William Campbell, he designed another 6 holes to make a 9-hole golf course, and then eventually, over the next 5 to 9 years, was able to create an 18-hole golf course. So that's typically what they would consider the country club if you just looked at the golf course online, but that is not the golf course they're playing this week. Like I said, there's going to be holes brought in from other golf courses, most notably the Primrose 9, which is an adjacent course for the country club. They're going to be in the routing, which, like I said, is going to make this course look a lot different than what we've seen in the past, and is of course to make this place more difficult. Over the years, as technology has changed, this golf course has gone more and more beatable, but the reason why it stands the test of time and why it's going to be the venue for this year's major championship is because its design is flawless. It's timeless at this point, kind of similar to a Southern Hills Country Club. You can see that you don't need a long golf course really to have any sort of defense. Long rough is the specialty of the US Open. That is certainly going to be something that we see this week, but at the country club, you have insanely small greens. You have greens that don't necessarily have a ton of undulation, but they're going to be running at lightning speeds, and when you miss these greens, you're going to be in a world of trouble. I mean, there's rock outcroppings around most of the greens, there's waist-high fescue, just a lot of hazards to be had out there. So rather than this being a 7,800 yard golf course that you have to go out there and beat with sheer power, you know, the Bryson DeChambeau route that we saw a few years ago, or even what Jon Rahm did at Pebble Beach. I mean, he kind of took that place apart with just brute strength. This is the opposite. This is a thinking man's golf course. This is the type of venue where a Tiger Woods in his prime would probably just kick everyone's butt because he's the most strategic player out there. And when you miss around Brookline, you have to miss at the right spots because all that strategy comes into play. All the bunkers out there, all the hills and humps that are on these greens are strategically placed. I mean, the golf course has been around since the 1880s. All of these architects that have had their hands on this golf course have all put their genius into this design. And this is why it's such a timeless golf course. All of those great minds, all of those architects over the years, you can see their imprint still on this golf course. And Gil Hanse, since 2007, has not taken that away. If anything, he's enhanced some of those features that we've seen over the years. So that's why I'm so excited about this golf course. First off, it's been designed by the members. It's the only time you can really say that when it comes to a golf course. And it's got a few other features we need to talk about. So first off, it is a par 70. It is 7,254 yards. So very similar to a Southern Hills. It's a short par 70. So again, length isn't the defense of this golf course. It more comes down to the greens, where they are tiny, just 4,388 square foot on average, and that is per green. And they're going to be running lightning fast, 12 and a half to start the week, very likely, and very likely 13, maybe even 13 and a half on the stint meter come Saturday and Sunday. They are Poa Anua greens, which is perhaps a little bit atypical for a northeastern golf course, but this is, of course, a high-end golf course. They put a lot of money into their maintenance, so if they want to run Poa Anua greens, so be it. They're able to maintain them and get that taken care of, so you're going to see that surface out there. The fairways are tiny, right? You're used to seeing this at US Opens. They make it extremely difficult to hit the short stuff, because when you miss that short stuff, you're in gnarly rough. And as of right now, the USGA has it listed as 3-inch rough, but I'm not buying that. Every single year they tell us it's going to be 3.5, maybe 3-inch rough like they're saying this year, but every single year at the US Open, it's the most gnarly rough you've ever seen. It may only be 3 inches long when they put out the report. By the time they're teeing up on Thursday morning, though, it's usually at least 4.5 inches, if not longer than that. And the issue at Brookline isn't the primary rough, where there's only 9 acres of primary rough. Usually it's closer to like 50 or 60 acres of primary rough around the golf course, if not more than that, is because of everything else. There is rocks all around this golf course. It looks like a prehistoric golf course. You have waist-high fescue covering a majority of the land, and while there's not a ton of deep forest areas, when you get into one of those deep forest areas, it's a dense, deep forest. I mean, there's a reason why they didn't take apart that part of the forest. It would have been impossible. To cost a ton of money to do that demolition on the trees or cut down all of that lumber. So in either circumstance, you're talking about hazards to be had out there, whether you're hitting off of rocks, you're in that waist-high fescue, you're in a deep patch of trees. This is the type of golf course where even if you're driving the ball well, you're going to find some of those hazards, because these fairways are just absolutely tiny. The ribbons out there when you're standing on the tee box. So being able to get out of trouble this week is going to be a necessity. And obviously, if you can be an elite driver, if you can somehow get it out there with distance and hit those ribbons of fairways, you are going to be rewarded handsomely this week. And I mean, if we take a look at some of the comps, which we'll talk about a little bit later, a lot of these recent courses like a Southern Hills, like a Colonial Country Club, or even what we saw last week at St. George's is a good comp, because the rough at those courses was extremely penal, and I would expect that to only be more so the case this week around the Country Club. The rough, like I said, is about 4 inches long, I'd expect. They're only listing at 3 inches right now, which I just do not buy. It is a Kentucky bluegrass for the primary rough, but there's a lot of rye out there when it starts to get towards that secondary cut, and then that Poa and fescue grass that I was talking about before, which can get at least knee-high, if not closer to waist-high in a few spots. The topography is, like I said, prehistoric, lots of rocks around the property. There's not a ton of heavy tree lines, but a few of them are not going to be lenient. You definitely have to avoid some of those heavy tree lined areas, but the bailout areas on those holes aren't so forgiving either. There's plenty of elevation change here as well, which might be a little bit surprising for this part of the country. It's not especially hilly over there towards Boston, but there is going to be plenty of blind shots. There's plenty of humps and hills that have been left in the landscape, mostly due to when this course was founded. Early 1880s, they didn't have all these massive machines and things to take out all these hills and humps, so they left them on the golf course and made them part of the design features. So I do like that. I like the fact that you're going to have shots where you can't even see the green when you're hitting a few uphill par threes. A few of the par fours have, one of them's called Himalayas this week, where you have two massive mounds in the middle of the fairway, where you pretty much have to split the middle of the two to have any chance of having a straightforward shot. So those are some of the design features that you're going to see this week. And in terms of weather, it's supposed to be dry in the area from Monday through Friday morning. So I would expect the course to play a little bit tougher rougher on Thursday and Friday than perhaps over the weekend. And that's because on Friday through Saturday morning, there is a very high chance of thunderstorms. So that could potentially take some of the firmness and fastness out of the greens. They don't have a sub-air system at this golf course. Wouldn't expect that for this type of a venue. But at the same time, that could go down the wash. We might not have those storms come Saturday and Sunday. We might have them come Monday or Tuesday instead, right? It's just Monday right now. It's really hard to tell on the weather. But the one thing that is consistent across all of the weather sites right now is that it should be dry for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday there. So I would expect Thursday and Friday to play at least a little bit more difficult than perhaps we'd expect if it was raining over the first 2 days. The wind isn't anything really in the forecast now. And in the area, wind isn't typically a huge factor. You're in the Northeast, there's plenty of trees out there to protect you. But if the wind does kick up, kind of like in Augusta National, Parkland golf courses can be difficult with that wind due to some of the eddy effects. Also, kind of hard with judging the wind when you can't feel it with all the trees blocking it. So if the wind does kick up, which might be a little bit rare, just given its location, it could certainly rear its ugly head. All right, now let's talk about the players I expect to succeed this week. So with our key stats, at number 1, we have shots gained approach, which shouldn't surprise anybody out there. It's usually going to be the most important stat regardless of the venue, but particularly at a major championship type venue, especially one with 4,400 square foot greens, tiny targets out there. And when you miss those targets, ones that are extremely penal, there's that 4, maybe 4.5 inch rough that we're expecting. And when you miss the greens, it's almost certainly going to be the rough, if not a sand hazard, or even one of those natural areas with fescue, because at this golf course, there's not fairway surrounding these greens. It's not one of those courses where they shave off the sides. They put you down into those chipping areas to get up and down. It's a golf course kind of similar to an Arnold Palmer Invitational, or even a Memorial that we saw about a month ago, where you're going to be hitting out of the rough for a lot of your chip shots, which there's an art form to that. In general, the players that are better around the green tend to be even better in that situation, and the guys that tend to struggle around the green tend to struggle even more. So a shots gained approach, regardless of your around the green skill set, is going to be of utmost importance to make sure that you're avoiding that situation, because even if you're a solid around the green player, you're not going to put yourself in contention at a major by missing a ton of greens, right? You're going to need to save yourself in the off opportunity that'll come up from time to time, but you want to be one of these ball strikers that's going out there and playing some consistent golf. So that's why it comes in at number 1. But at number 2, maybe the key differentiator this week, because shots gained approach is almost always going to correlate to a player's ability in general, right? It's a very consistent stat. It's usually what separates the best players from the worst players on tour. But from a skill set perspective, what I'm really focusing on this week is off the tee play. Much like we've seen over the last 3-4 weeks on tour, we've seen it at Colonial, we saw it last week at St. George's, at Southern Hills certainly for the PGA Championship. There's a premium both on driving distance, both to go out there and score, but also driving accuracy. The rough at all of those venues was similar, if not even actually a little bit more lenient than what we're going to see this week at the US Open. So making sure that you're both long and accurate is of the utmost importance. In fact, if you're somebody who's not an elite distance guy, you have to be an elite accuracy guy. In fact, if you're not an elite accuracy guy or an elite distance guy, he is not going to be in my player pool this week, because to find success at these type of venues with rough as gnarly as we have, you have to have that skill set. I mean, look at the last 2 winners. Last year, Jon Rahm, arguably top 3 driver in the world, if not the best driver in the world when he won that golf tournament. The year before that, Bryce DeChambeau, arguably the best driver in the world, right? It's him, Rory McIlroy, and Jon Rahm. Those are the top 3 drivers in the world. And you could say Cameron Champ right per the stats, but he's not a top player in the world. He's dog shit at everything else. So we're going to throw him out of the equation there. It's really those 3. And this year, I think one of those 3, or I should say probably throw Bryson out because of the wrist injury, one of those 2 is very likely to win, because they're going to be in prime position on a lot of these holes, because they're not very long. They're like 450 yards. If you hit that 320, 330 yard bomb in the fairway, you're going to have wedge in hand all day. So the guy that can get the hottest with the driver around this golf course is going to have by far the most scoring opportunities. So certainly being accurate off the tee is great, but also having that distance is really, the key to actually winning this event. So guys that are super accurate, say like a Colin Morikawa out there, I still think they can contend here, maybe even win. I mean, we've seen him win at major championships before. I don't want to write him off or anything. I'd much rather have the guys that are also long off the tee. So that's why I'm taking a look at shots gained off the tee in general, not just driving accuracy there, because there is going to be a huge boost for being long as well. And you saw that last week with Rory, obviously won at St. George's. At Colonial, Sam Burns won, and another elite driver of the golf ball. And who won at the PGA Championship? Just Justin Thomas, and another elite driver of the golf ball. Is it a surprise that 3 elite drivers have won at those 3 comp courses? Absolutely not. I would expect the same thing to happen this week. So those elite drivers are going to be on my short list this week. i.e. Jon Rahm, Rory McIlroy obviously coming in off the wind, and going to be a key differentiator with a lot of the other players that I target. At number 3, we have shots gained putting, which is always going to be important in major championships. And this is really the next tiebreaker, right? The ball striking is of utmost importance. You've got to keep yourself out of trouble. The next differentiator, right, the next thing you can use to filter out your player pool or to make tiebreakers, that sort of thing, is their putting. You're going to have to make putts this week to win the golf tournament. You're going to have to go out there and score. You're likely going to have to make some 15 to 20 footers to differentiate yourself from your peers. So the guys that are able to do that the best from putting in less than 20 feet, that's the real key stat that I'm looking at this week, is going to be a huge tiebreaker, because with these tiny greens, there's not going to be a bunch of 50 to 60 foot putts. Again, just 4,400 square foot. So 3-putt avoidance, not really looking at it all that much. It's more about those scoring putts, right? Can you hit those 5 to 10 footers? Can you hit those 10 to 15 footers or those 15 to 20 footers? That can be a little bit tough from time to time. So those are going to be a few categories that I'm hunkering down on, but also looking at shots gained putting on lightning fast greens. We're going to see them at least 12.5 to 13 on the stint meter. And there is certainly an art form for going out and doing that. A few other key stats I'm looking at, we have shots gained at major championships. That's going to be of importance this week. No matter the major championship, you're looking at a similar field, similar scoring conditions, and while each setup is different, obviously US Open, known for its gnarly, rough, small greens. PGA Championship, more known for its weather impact. A lot of windy golf courses for whatever reason. They all have their own identity. They're all difficult, though. So I am looking at just major championships in general as a comp. Looking at shots gained around the green, like I said, you're going to have plenty of misses around the golf course. And while you don't want to be relying on shots gained around the green, it's really that 4th tiebreaker, right? Let's say that you have somebody that's both strong off the tee and on approach. Maybe they're both kind of struggling with the putter, so you can't make the tiebreaker there. Who's the better around the green player? Right, that's the last tiebreaker that you can go to in making these decisions, but it's going to be difficult to get up and down. Like I said, you have all that rough around the green, you have all those humps and hills to deal with. These architects have added into the fold over the years. So being a solid around the green player could be helpful this week. Just not something that I'm really hunkering down on because, like I said, you need to be ball striking the heck out of it and putting yourself in position to begin with. Next up, we have shots gained on the comp courses, which we're going to touch on in just over a minute here. There's plenty this week that I'm looking at. Also taking a look at par 4 scoring. Because it is a par 70, you do have 12 par 4s on site. And also shots gained out of the rough. There's some gnarly rough out there. It's a key stat that we looked at Wells Fargo. We looked at it at Colonial, Southern Hills. We looked at it last week as well. Going to look at it again because we have this 3.5, 4-inch rough. There's also an art form for getting out of that cabbage. All right, and now let's go through our comp courses, which are courses around the tour that are extremely comparable to what I expect to see at the country club. And a lot of the results from these events, I think we can use to make assertions about what might potentially happen this week. And the thing that makes this week different than most is I'm going to split it up into 2 categories. We're going to take a look at some of the recent golf courses that I think compare very well to what we could expect this week. So we could take a look at some of those recent form metrics and some of the more historical fits. US Open venues that I think are going to play extremely similar because the US Open kind of has its own identity. They love that gnarly rough. They love to use similar pin locations. Just the skill set for winning a US Open is repeatable. We've seen plenty of repeat champions at the US Open and people that have tended to struggle at the US Open over the years. Phil Mickelson really comes to mind with that, right? The guy cannot win the US Open for whatever reason, whereas guys like a Tiger Woods tend to just print money around the US Open, especially when he was in his prime. So definitely something to be said for the US Open type of setup. So that's why we're going ahead and separating them into the 2 categories. So first off with our comp courses based on recent form, number 1 is going to be the most recent major, Southern Hills Country Club, right, for the PGA Championship. There was gnarly rough around that place, and while it's not going to be nearly as gnarly as what we have this week for the primary rough. You were dealing with small greens. They had some undulation to them. They were a bent POA mix, so they weren't the POA that we're going to see this week, but they had a similar influence to them. Obviously different parts of the country, but you had to be accurate off the tee. Distance off the tee was especially helpful there. And of course, hitting those small targets was the name of the game. So the fact that JT won that event was not a surprise. And based on our key stats so far, you'd definitely get to a Justin Thomas, right? Shots gained approach, shots gained off the tee, and even his shots gained putting of late has been there, particularly on the bent grass surface, which was the dominant surface for Southern Hills. And while it is POA this week, maybe we get to someone else on the POA stats this week. Wink, wink. We're not going to be taking Justin Thomas this week, I can tell you that much. A little bit of a better POA putter in mind, at least for me. It's still great from a comp perspective, right? From tee to green, I think they're both almost identical classical golf courses. You really have to think yourself around that place. It's definitely something that I'm looking at as a relatively reliable comp course this week. Next up, we have St. George's Golf and Country Club, the home of the RBC Canadian Open. We just saw this golf course last week, and throughout the broadcast, I mean, you heard the allusions. Like, this rough at St. George's looks extremely similar to what we'd expect next week at the US Open. It's not just that, both were par 70s, relatively short par 70s. You had small greens, and while you didn't have a ton of undulation on the greens, you had enough to make around the green play tricky. That is the exact same scenario this week. I mean, everything I just said is a direct parallel to what we're going to see at the Country Club. And while the Country Club might be a little bit more difficult, I wouldn't expect a winning score of 19 under par like we saw Rory McIlroy get to. From the skill set perspective, I absolutely love all these parallels we can make. So that's going to be another comp that I'm taking a look at recent form for. And lastly, we have Colonial Country Club. So that was the home of the Charles Schwab Challenge just a few weeks ago. Sam Burns ended up winning that. Another golf course with tight fairways, gnarly rough, small undulating greens. And while it was down in Texas, right, might be a little bit firmer and faster at that golf course, it played difficult. It played almost as difficult as I'm expecting it to play this week. So I like that from a comp perspective. It's in a completely different part of the country, at least St. George's in the Northeast. So kind of similar to a Southern Hills. It does have a different feel. You know, you're going to get different firmness factors. It's not going to be as humid, all that sort of fun stuff. But from tee to green, the shots that are required around that venue, I love a lot of the parallels that we can make. And now let's go over to the US Open comp. So from more of a historical perspective, right, to try and get some of the recent form for guys in a more unique way. At number one, we have Shinnecock Country Club, which is one of the founding members of the USGA, so very similar to the Country Club, is one of the American Classics, a par 70, relatively short, a thinking man's golf course. Just from a US Open perspective, I'd expect it to play almost identical. So I love going to Shinnecock, taking a look at that leaderboard. Taking a look at Oakmont Country Club is also something that I'm doing. Oakmont is a par 71, so it's not a par 70, but it's not a super long par 71. It's more of a classical golf course, small, more undulating greens at Oakmont. I mean, the greens there are ridiculous, right? They run extremely fast, like we would expect to see at the Country Club, but they also have some of the craziest slopes that you're going to see, even crazier than Augusta National. So that would be the one key differentiating factor there. But from tee to green, you have all that fescue out there at Oakmont. I've played Oakmont before. You have those tight greens, fairway bunkers, all that sort of fun stuff. Reminds me a lot from the topography perspective of what we're going to see here this week at the Country Club. And lastly, we have Pebble Beach Golf Links, which is on the completely other side of the country. It's a coastal golf course, but you're talking about gnarly rough, right? That's always the case at the US Open, in tiny greens, right? Tiny greens, gnarly rough, small fairways. It is the same exact setup we're getting this week. So if you can take apart, put aside all the topography, which is different, right? You don't have as much elevation change over there at Pebble. You can definitely see the comp there. From a skill set perspective, from tee to green, very identical from the shot perspective. Length of the golf course is similar. It's actually even shorter at Pebble Beach than what you're going to see this week. So certainly something I'm looking at from the leaderboard perspective, especially because it was just last year's US Open. All right, guys, that's all I've got for this week's course breakdown. As per usual, really enjoy bringing these to you, and I am super stoked for this week's event. I mean, the Country Club going to be an absolute classic. I'm expecting to see design overcome power this week, and this really to be a thinking man's golf course. So I'm going to enjoy it. I'm expecting carnage. I'm expecting it to play relatively difficult. So for a winning score, I'd imagine it's going to be close to 11, 12 under par. But as per usual on this video, guys, go ahead and comment what you think the winning score is going to be down in the comments. Before you hop on out of here too, make sure you smash that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. That way you don't miss any of the course breakdowns that come. We do have DFS content I'm dropping on the channel here throughout the week. Prize picks content, showdown content when it comes to DraftKings. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of that content to come in the future. I appreciate all the support here, guys. Best of luck with all of your bets, all of your DFS lineups this week, whatever you guys are going with, or just enjoying the event in general. It's going to be an absolute slugfest out there. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll see you guys next time.